Hello everyone, welcome to Indian Economy by Aman Soni. In today's news hour, we shall be discussing the important articles related to economy from the Hindu newspaper. In page 1, there is a discussion about free trade agreement in the BIMSTEC. Recently, the BIMSTEC members met and they signed the charter for BIMSTEC. Now it has officially has an emblem, a flag, and formally listed purpose and the principles for what the BIMSTEC has come into force. And in this meet, Prime Minister Modi has mooted that we need to have a free trade agreement between the BIMSTEC countries so that the main focus here is the necessity to develop the coastal ecosystem, shipping ecosystem, and to have electricity grid connectivity between the BIMSTEC countries so that the power would be shared and the trade of electricity would be easier if we have a connected grid between all the BIMSTEC countries. There is no article in the editorial page. In the open editorial page, there is a detail about the article about the Sri Lankan economic crisis. So we have been seeing how the Sri Lankan is going through the balance of payments crisis because the foreign exchange reserves were depleted and they were not able to import the essential commodity goods for consumption, and on the other side the government is also not able to repay the debt, because of which the inflation for the essential commodities are increasing and the people are suffering. So the author goes into the details of this article and he talks that we can trace the roots of the crisis to colonialism and the post-war effects that Sri Lanka had to face. But he says that even though we may not take such a long view, even though if we consider the previous 2 decades, we can observe a trend that the main wealth of Sri Lanka is tied to the export of primary commodities. Basically, there is huge production of tea and rubber in Sri Lanka, and the foreign exchange would be dependent on the export of these commodities, tea and rubber. And the other source of revenue for the Sri Lankan government is the revenue from exports, revenue from tourism sector, and the remittances, because lot of Sri Lankan citizens, they work in the West Asian countries and they send money to Sri Lanka, and the remittances also make up a huge chunk of the revenue that Sri Lanka gets. After the internal war in civil war in the Sri Lanka, finally in 2009 when it ended after 26 long years, they had the opportunity to develop the economy tremendously. If you look at the facts, the post-war GDP, it was growing at a reasonable level of 8 to 9% from the 2009 to 2012. And after the 2013, because of the effects of the global economy, the Sri Lankan economy also got affected. The economy started going downwards because of the price fall in the global commodities. We have discussed how Sri Lanka is majorly based on the exports of tea and rubber. If the demand and prices for these goods fall in the global market, the Sri Lankan exports would reduce. Because of the reduction in export, their foreign exchange earning ability would reduce and the money they are getting would also reduce. And the exports slow down because of the fall in the prices of the global commodities, but the imports had to continue. Just because you're not able to export, you can't stop your essential commodity imports. They majorly imports milk, rice, and all the other essential items. The imports had to keep going. One side your exports are falling, but your imports are continuing, and the average GDP growth rate also almost fell by half. At that point of time, what would have been the best thing to do is a counter cyclical fiscal policy, because the economy is going into a downward spiral. The government should have gone for a easy monetary policy and easy fiscal policy, wherein they would supply money into the economy so that the consumption and demand would increase. It would kickstart the demand and the economic cycle would positively increase, so that the demand would increase, then the incomes would increase, finally it would lead to increase in the demand again. But they were not able to do this. Why? The reason was Sri Lanka had taken a loan from international monetary funds, and IMF doesn't give the loan just like that. It would put some conditionalities when it is giving the loan. So IMF put a loan condition that they put certain conditions wherein the capital market had to be kept open, the exchange rate was to be determined by the market forces and various other conditions. And because of the 2008 global financial crisis, the capital that was invested in Sri Lanka and most of the Asian countries, the investors from the Western nations took away the capital. So the financial markets also got affected. And again in 2009, when they took a loan from IMF again put conditionalities that it would have to reduce the budgetary deficits to 5% of GDP by 2011. If you see, on one side the economy is suffering, they are not able to produce enough, and at that point of time IMF is putting such a condition that they have to reduce the budgetary deficit. So this is against the basic economics logic, and obviously it had a adverse effect, negative effect on the Sri Lankan economy. Again in 2016, when they again went for a loan with the IMF gave loan for 3-year period, but this time they put a condition that the fiscal deficit have to be reduced. Earlier they said budgetary deficit has to be reduced. Now the fiscal deficit has to be reduced by 2020. And IMF also wanted to reform the tax policy and tax administration in the country. And they also wanted to the Sri Lankan government to commercialize all the public sector undertakings, increase the flexibility in exchange rates, improve the competitiveness in the foreign exchange investment markets. These are all capitalist measures which would help the Western countries who are performing well. For a country whose economy is performing bad, if IMF puts such conditions, it would obviously adversely impact the already suffering economy. So, just like common sense says, the IMF's conditions led to the adverse impact, negative impact on the Sri Lankan economy. The growth rates fell, the investment rates also fell because there is no growth. The exports are not happening properly. Why would an investor invest in such a country? Even though there was flexibility in investment norms, the investors were not willing to invest in Sri Lanka. And because of the investments falling, the savings rate also fell because there is no export earning, there is no income. So where would people save from? Only if they have income they would save. Now there is no income, they can't save, the savings also fell. Because of the saving falling, investment falling, the economy started going into the downward spiral again. Then in 2019, again other factors impacted. If you remember, the eastern bomb blast took place in Sri Lanka, because of which the tourism got affected. Any tourist would not want to visit a country which is not safe for the tourists. So Sri Lanka used to earn major revenue from tourism sector also. That also got affected because of the eastern bomb blast. Then a new government came into power after the elections, and that particular government, they had promised lower tax rates and high subsidies for farmers in their election manifesto. And when they came into force, when they came into power, they implemented a huge tax cut on the VAT rate. For example, the VAT value added tax was reduced from 15% to 8%, almost by half percent, almost cut by half. And the minimum threshold for the registration for value added tax, that was increased so that the tax base reduced. Then the annual income tax limit for the income tax waiver, that also was reduced. Then the nation building tax which they have, that also was reduced. So if you can observe, you are increasing the minimum limit of the income for income tax on one side. On the indirect taxes VAT, you are reducing the tax rate, and again you are increasing the threshold. So what would happen? The revenue that you are going to get from the tax would reduce because the tax base is getting lower and lower. Tax base is how much of the people or how much of the revenues that you can tax. So because of which the incomes also fell. They went for this populist measure of suddenly decreasing the tax rates, because of which the tax revenues of the government got affected. So the impact was so high that the number of registered taxpayers declined almost by 33%, and Sri Lanka lost almost close to 2% of its GDP because of the reduction in tax rate. You can see how big the impact was. And the pandemic came. The economy was already performing so badly because of all these reasons, and when the pandemic came, the exports got affected more. The basic exports like tea, rubber, spices, garments, they suffered. The tourism sector was already suffering from eastern bomb blast. It got affected more because of the lockdowns and pandemics. And the government expenditure was increasing because of this expenditure that was happening because of the pandemic and the safety measures they had to take. The ratio of public debt to GDP increased, and the remittances which they were getting from the West Asian countries, it also fell because the people, all the workers, they started coming back to home because of the loss of jobs during the pandemic. And Sri Lanka used to provide major fertilizer subsidies to its farmers. So the government thought, we are having very less foreign exchange, we have to save this foreign exchange. In order to do that, we will totally ban the fertilizer subsidies and totally ban the fertilizer imports itself from May 2021. So a country who is dependent on fertilizers, chemical fertilizers, suddenly if you ban the total import of fertilizers, how would you produce? The government said you have to go for complete 100% organic farming. We know that in organic farming, the yield would be slightly lesser as compared to the fertilizer chemical farming, because in organic farming we go for natural processes and the wastage and the pests are more. In chemical farming, even though it's not healthy, the yield would be better than organic farming. Now overnight you get a scheme wherein you want all your agriculturalist farmers to switch over from fertilizers to organic farming. It would very adversely affect the yield. So later they realized that and they removed that ban of fertilizers in November 2021. But still, many agricultural scientists, they were telling that the yield in paddy would drop by 25%, the yield in tea would drop by 35%, and the yield in coconut would drop by 30%. So because of switching over to organic farming, suddenly the yields also fell. On one side you are not able to export, on other side you are not able to import because your foreign exchange reserves are coming down. On the other side, the basic yield of the goods that you are producing, the agricultural commodities in your country, that is getting affected because of your policy wherein you suddenly said that you have to stop chemical fertilizers and you have to start using organic farming. And because of that, the agriculture production fell and import of basic goods became even more necessary. Then, because they were not able to import more and more, because of the reduction in supply and the increase in demand, the inflation rose to 17.5% in February 2022. Adding to all this, they also faced a problem when it comes to the productivity in tea and rubber. That also fell. So the article says that the current economic crisis in Sri Lanka is a result of so many factors. One of them being the historical imbalances of the economic structure, because they were mainly primary producing country, primary goods exporting country, and the IMF loan related conditionalities. At a time when they were supposed to go for easy fiscal policy, IMF put more and more conditions which adversely impacted the economy, and misguided policies of the authoritarian rulers. We saw how suddenly they banned the fertilizer sub imports and they wanted to switch to the organic imports, and the reduction in tax rate, because of which the government revenue got affected almost to the extent of 2.2% of GDP. All this led to the current economic crisis, and if proper steps are not taken, it would be very difficult to revive the Sri Lankan economy, which is performing so badly. Here this article talks about the safety conditions and the nature of work of the gig economy workers. Recently the CEO of Zomato said that the food delivery would be done within 10 minutes. So there was a Twitter war discussing about this particular issue, and Zomato CEO issued a clarification that they would also consider the safety of the delivery platform and they were not putting pressure on the workers to deliver at a faster rate. But the authors say that platform industry is all about grabbing the market share. You have to increase the efficiency. There is a competition between the say for example Zomato and Swiggy on who would give at a competitive and a cheaper price. The delivery charges should be lower and the delivery should be at a faster rate. So there is constant competition between all the giants in the market. One side they would want to reduce the cost, and other side they would want to increase the speed of the delivery, and this would directly impact the delivery partner at the ground level. And the fees that is paid to the delivery partner, it is again dependent on the earnings. So if the cost is reduced, the earnings that the delivery partner would get would also reduce. This is like saying you have to run twice as fast as possible just to stay in the same place. A research study studied the average earnings of the gig economy workers employed in the food delivery platforms and average daily work hours that they worked. So the food platform said that all the details given by the food platform workers about the average earning of the platform workers, they gave the details about the gross earnings, but out of the gross earning various costs would be deducted. For example, the worker himself have to bear the cost of the fuel, then comes the cost associated with the bike, the maintenance, then the depreciation on the bike, then the taxes and levies that he has to pay. And because of all these reductions, the gross earnings, the cost would reduce the gross earning, and the net earning would finally that comes into the hand of the worker would be very less. So the data says that almost 30% cost is eaten by the fuel cost. And now that the prices of petrol and diesel is increasing because of global crude oil volatility, the impact would be more on the delivery partners, and other 30% on the capital costs and levies. The platform also charges commission for every delivery made. So even though the platforms claim that these wage workers make a decent daily wage and they have a problem freedom to log on and log off whenever they want, it is not so in reality, because only when you work for continuous long hours you would be able to make some decent amount of living for the day. Otherwise you would not be able to make much amount. And when it comes to the question of work intensity, on an average most of the workers work for almost 13 hours per day, and they traveled around 190 kilometers each day within the city delivering various goods. So one of the principles that the company said would be regarding the worker safety. So the authors question that if somebody is working 13 hours a day, traveling 190 kilometers within the city on a two-wheeler, that too in a busy traffic, will that person be safe? Because if you travel, if you work for 13 hours, you would feel tired and you won't be able to concentrate while driving also, and almost daily you are working for 190 kilometers and you would have pressure for delivering at a faster rate, because of which the safety of the worker, and they are traveling on two-wheeler bikes, the safety of the worker is in question. So the authors finally conclude that saying the value of the companies like Zomato and Swiggy, they have been valuated high and high in the industry when they go for listing. But the person who is working on the ground, the delivery partner, the person who delivers the food, is he getting any share out of this amount that the company is making? So they say that the companies have to be more humane and provide better work conditions for the workers, so that their safety also would be increased, and they should also get more share in the wealth that the company is making, because finally it is the workers who are working, and it is because of them the company is performing well. In the business page, all the articles, just go through the headlines, no need to go through the details of it. There is nothing important today, so you can skip them. These are all the articles related to economy today. Thank you so much.